What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick,
And my name is Dave.
and this is the Deep Dive episode number 50.
5-0 right here.
That's right. We had a cake to celebrate. We got our party hats on. I can't believe we made it to 50.
It is, that's quite an accomplishment.
That
these
is pretty
days,
cool.
to do anything 50 times.
I know. And
That's great.
I guess what our year total mark, when did we start? Do you remember?
We started at Lent last year.
Okay.
I think so. About this time last year.
Yeah.
We missed a couple of weeks during the year. So
Right.
we've been doing it about a year.
That's
So
awesome, man.
I remember that one of our first ones, we were talking about the Super Bowl.
Yeah. I
And
remember
so
that.
Super Bowl's this Sunday.
Big
Yeah,
game.
Big game.
It's the big game.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah. I was listening to a podcast, and the guy said he wasn't.
He didn't worry about it.
He didn't worry about
Nobody
it. I'm
was
not
gonna
going
get
to
him.
worry about it.
Well,
Yeah.
today we're talking about your sermon from Sunday called
Yeah.
Grace on the Mountain, talking
Yeah.
about salt and light. And I think it's going to be a good one. I'm excited to get into this.
All right, let's do it.
All right. Well, Dave, you kind of brought it up. We are in a big game week, I guess.
Yeah.
We've got the Chiefs and the Eagles coming down to the wire.
Yeah.
You got any predictions? Because we did really well on our college football prediction.
Yeah, I don't. I will watch the game. I'm not emotionally invested on anything,
Yeah.
especially not the. No one listens to us on the halftime show. We called it last year.
Yeah. We
What they should do, but no one listens to
Foo
us.
Fighters, man.
Yeah.
You got to get them.
But yeah, that's his. It's just we'll cut across every genre. But Rihanna, we'll see. Commercials, they've already started showing. I'm pulling for the Chiefs
Okay.
because I got a couple of friends who, from Kansas City, but I don't care.
Well, then we will be a church divided then, because I think I'm going for the Eagles.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just because they got some Georgia boys on there, it's like let them get their W.
Yeah.
And I have a couple friends who are Eagles fans as well.
So,
But anyway, we're here. We're here to talk about the sermon, this idea of salt and light. And why don't you guys go? Why don't you guys roll in here?
Okay, so we're in this series that is essentially looking, actually, as I was looking at, it's really breaking down. It's just chapter 5 of the Beatitudes, which is actually in Matthew 5 through 7. And so we'll finish that this week in chapter 5. But we've been looking at, the Sermon on the Mount, this important sermon that Jesus preached, that he's talking about the kingdom of God. And so last week we looked at the Beatitudes, the sort of beginning of that. And this week we get into a section which just really sort of personifies, exemplifies Jesus' teaching, in that he just masterfully uses metaphors, illustrations. He tells stories, which we call parables. And so he comes right out of the gate after the Beatitudes and says some things about salt and light. In fact, he says that we are the salt of the earth. We are the salt, the light of the world. And so he's using those metaphors because they would have meant something to those original hearers, and they meant something to us too. So this is the really cool thing about Jesus' teaching, is that it can transition from generation to generation to generation. And using something like salt and light, is something that we can get our hands around too, and we can wrap our minds around.
Yeah, because we're still very familiar with these concepts. So.
Right. But one of the things that I did talk about in salt is we think about the attributes of what it possibly might mean that we are the salt of the earth, or salt of the world. And that is to understand that in antiquity, in the old times, in times of Jesus, the salt was very valuable. Today we got table salt everywhere. We got salt packets everywhere. We think of salt as, not really having that much value.
Yeah.
But back in that day, it did. It was something that was, one of the examples I gave is the Roman soldiers were actually paid in salt. And so, acquiring salt was not as easy as it was today, particularly if you were in higher regions. The salt places would be closer to the seashore and stuff, where they would get the salt. But harvesting and getting salt, and you needed salt.
Right.
That's one of the things about salt, one of the attributes that we would say is, actually the human body needs to survive, needs a certain amount of salt each day. Not as much as we modern people are ingesting. That's why
probably
people
taking
go
it.
on salt-free diets. But in order to survive, you got to have a certain amount of salt every day. But also salt, of course, we think of different ways that we can name that salt preserves food.
Yeah.
And so, we have these salted hams that, they hang up and stuff. But back there in that time when there wasn't any refrigeration, that's how they would preserve food. They would, heavily salt fish or their meats or whatever. And that's how they kept them alive. And so for Roman soldiers, that's where it been important, because if they were traveling, then they could salt that, but then they could also trade it. And I'm not sure about this time, but one of the things that I read was that, there was a time when salt, an ounce of salt and an ounce of silver had about the same worth.
Oh, wow.
So you could trade it back and forth. But Roman soldiers, part of their salary, and actually if you go back and do the etymology of the word salary, it goes back to this in salt. I think I can't pronounce it exactly right, but it's, S-A-L or S-O-L, a son. So S-A-L was salt, and it became a French word, and through the Anglo-Saxon thing, that is how we got salary and to think about, somebody was paid. So, yeah, I thought so. But, it was used in the early days in medicines. And the whole phrase about salt in the wound, which now we think of as because it's painful,
Right.
but it would stop infection when they went in there. So, and can you think of other things about salt? I mean, yeah.
No, I mean, I just know that I use it, and I know that we're not talking about the person,
Yeah.
if somebody is salty, which is often referred to now as like somebody who's a little upset about something versus
That's true. And salt in the wound is a bad thing
Yeah.
too. And so it's interesting how words can
kind of
change.
changed.
Can change. But a salty person today, or somebody who's talking with salty language,
Yeah.
is
it's
negative.
kind of looked bad upon. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, other than that, I know it's used to preserve food. I know I enjoy it, but not too much.
Yeah.
I can think of a couple meals that have had too much salt that I'm like, I need more water, or I will, dehydrate myself. But
Well, and there was another thing. I actually listened to a lecture of a guy who wrote this book called The History of Salt. I didn't read the whole book because it was really long.
Right.
But I went on YouTube and found a lecture that he gave.
Notes? No.
Yeah, well, I just listened to his lecture. It was like 40 minutes.
Okay.
And, some things that I learned in there. And one of the things is that, like, salt, I guess we think we can taste salt, if something tastes salty, but what it does in food, it actually brings out the flavors in the food. It does something like breaking down the cells or something. They gave the chemical reason why it does that, but
Okay.
it actually helps you taste the food
flavor
better.
of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that metaphor working with us as believers, if we're to be the salt of the world, then that's significant because we're bringing out the flavor of the world. We're preserving the world,
Yeah.
So, a couple of things I thought about, one of the things I mentioned in America, in the United States, the number one use of salt is actually to de-ice roads, which they didn't have in ancient Israel.
Right.
A lot of de-icing roads. But, that metaphor is not lost on us either to kind of make the roadways safe for people.
It's got a lot of uses.
Yeah, it's got a use. It also kills slugs. You ever have slugs outside your house and put salt
I
on
never have actually.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's what Jesus had in mind. But yeah, so he used this phrase, you are the salt of the earth. And so just thinking about what it means to us now, it still has meaning. But it would have certainly had meaning, and maybe a little bit different because they would have thought about it as being valued.
Yeah.
But I did go into some Old Testament scriptures where there were salt covenants, going back into Leviticus, and part of that reason is it preserved it. It was valuable, and so all of those things were important in making a covenant. So that's why I guess it was used.
How would you think? Because I've heard I actually this is the first time I've heard that salt was used as like a currency or had a value of like silver or at some point. Maybe not at this point, but does that change the meaning of you're the salt in the earth? And I think that's kind of what you maybe were, but like, because I always thought about it as like, you're helping preserve, you're bringing out what's good, because I've understood the salt, and with like meats especially, like it helps bring out certain flavors and stuff like that. But like, I've never thought about it as currency. Like, does it like we
I think as they heard it, and heard it particularly, and I don't want to get ahead of myself because it's really one of the last points I wanted to make, but we'll go ahead. He says, you are the salt of the world. So if you are, then, he's saying you are valuable. And so I think the way that we would hear it and understand the metaphor as, going out and flavoring the world or preserving the world or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think we would not hear it from the value aspect. And so I think that might be different to those original hearers, that for Jesus to say, you are this valuable thing. They also knew about the salt covenants. So you're this something that has been preserved, this covenant that goes through. So I think there would have been certainly a slightly different hearing for them as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's cool to kind of put, if we're going to get into it later, I don't want to go too far, but it's cool to hear, because I think there are other places in the Bible that kind of express, that you have a certain value, but it's not necessarily like a currency value.
Yeah.
And this is not necessarily saying it's a currency value either, but to relate and kind of give you direct, this is a valuable thing, and you are something that's valuable in this world. I think that's cool.
And so light was the other part. You're the light of the world, and we've heard all my life, it was actually sung on Sunday, this little light of mine.
Yep.
And so, that's not something unfamiliar to us to hear you're the light of the world.
Right.
But it might have meant something to them that was different because it wasn't like we got lights here, but we're just so used to turning on a light or driving out at night, there being street lights everywhere.
Right.
And that wasn't the case then. When it got dark, it got dark.
Right.
They had little bitty oil lamps that they might have, but it never got like it is now at night, where you drive down the street or be in a certain part of the city at night and you can't tell if it's night or daytime. Right? But that sort of the metaphor of the darkness and light, that we are to drive out the darkness, as his followers into the world. So
and I love the parts because this metaphor is used. Is it just here, or is there's a couple of? Is this where? I'm sorry, I might be mixing it up, but where it talks about you don't cover the lights.
No, it does here.
Okay, that's this part.
No one has a light, and does and that was the thing about. I was thinking about the little song. So the second verse of that is hide it where? Hide it under
a bush.
A bushel.
Bushel, yeah.
What the heck is a bushel? What does that mean?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. Hiding under a bushel, no. That's it's just like no. We get the other part, but but the light. I guess you don't cover it up. But they wouldn't, because light was so valuable. Of course, if they had it at night, they're not going to put it under something so that the light's not going to help them.
Well, and it's and that part is what reminds me of there's oftentimes that we will hold back the way we feel like our Christian life should be going, or showing our faith and our religion or whatever, because of what might be going on around us, that we try to kind of chameleon, I guess, a little bit.
Sure.
But this is it's why would you do that? You're basically taking all the purpose of having the light and diminishing it if you're just hiding it and covering it and all that stuff.
And the other thing is, if you walk into a dark room with a light,
it lights it up.
It's obvious. Yeah. I mean, even just a little bit of light will light up a dark room.
Yep.
And lots of light will really light up a dark room. But that's, it's a great metaphor. It's a great illustration that he uses there, and so, moving into just sort of how I wanted to, focus on the takeaways that we have from that. Well, it's great to hear that you're salt and light, but they're more than metaphors. They're more than like lyrics to a sweet little song. This is what he's saying. He is laying out the kingdom of God. He's given these beatitudes, talking about he's blessed.
Yeah.
And then he immediately comes out of the gate with this, you are salt. You are light.
Yeah.
And I guess how I heard it a little bit different this time in those words is that it's not something you're becoming. Don't try, it's not try to be salt or try to be light, or you should be like salt, or you should be light. No, you are salt and light. And so that is a blessing to us, because he is comparing us and telling us that we are something valuable. We have this intrinsic worth. but there's also responsibility there, because we are salt and light in the world, and so however we live our lives reflects that.
Yeah.
Spreads that.
Yeah.
And so we can do that for good or for evil.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. And
Yeah.
and I'm kind of thinking like about some of the Beatitudes, where he kind of is talking like, blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor in spirit, and stuff like that. But you're right, like this is like a command. So it's almost like this stuff up here is it.
It's part of the same sermon.
Yeah, it's part of the
there's your
same
point.
sermon, and I'm wondering if like, he's saying like this stuff up here, these are not your forever.
Yeah.
But you are salt, and you are like this is part of who you are, as opposed to like, this isn't. You're not always going to be meek. You're not always going to be. You know what I mean? But blessed, I don't know. Do you hear what I'm saying?
I think it goes back to actually something you brought up last week.
Yeah.
Because you talked about the water and the gasoline thing.
Yeah.
And this idea that we've got water and gasoline, and so knowing how to use those things. So we're going to be salt and we're going to be light. So what light are we going to shed?
Yeah.
And so if we're a very cynical, if we are a divisive person, or some of those other characteristics, we could be salting those things, setting those afire. But remembering that we're salt and light in the earth, and we have value, when we have influence, how are we going to use that? What are we going to flavor? What are we going to preserve? What are we going to illuminate?
Yeah, I like that because I think originally I thought mostly about that as like it's your faith that makes you like this light, but not necessarily like, oh, I have salt and I have light and I can shine light on anything and I can use the salt to flavor anything.
Right.
What am I doing that with? That's an interesting. I've not considered that.
Yeah. But this whole idea around this salt and the preservation. There was one other story I told that came alive for me this week, unlike any time I've ever heard it before.
Yeah.
And that was considering the story of Lot's wife. Do you remember that story from the Old Testament? I think I told it on Sunday, so you probably heard it. But Lot's wife, they're leaving this town. God told them to leave, to get out of this town, and so they're leaving, and they're not supposed to look back. But Lot's wife looks back, and so she's turned into a pillar of salt.
Right.
And so I always had read that as if, like in the Monty Python movie where they, she turned me into a newt.
Yeah.
But, they turned her
Great
into a
movie,
thing.
by the way. I'm sorry.
Huh?
It's a great movie, by the way.
Oh,
Sorry.
awesome, yeah. But in fact, what happens, like when the salt came out of her, nothing else was going to be preserved. And so Jesus recalls the story, says, don't be like Lot's wife, because if you are trying to preserve your life, you're going to lose it. And so, but those of you who lose your life for Jesus' sake, they're going to preserve it. And so where does the real preservation come from? Not from things that, we, might count worthy here in this world, but looking at the eternal.
Yeah.
And so I think there's, what is it that is preserving our lives? And so it may just be different. And of course, that would also harken back to the salt covenants, which they were more aware of than I think we are here in our time. But so it's a little verse. It's a very well-known, there's 2 or 3 verses there that we looked at, but very well-known. It's some things, if you've been around church, you've heard all your life, but a lot more there maybe for us to live into and to think about than maybe we're sometimes aware.
I think there's definitely some reflection spots and in a way of how are we going to use what we have to help bring out the good in some of this stuff and help. I think one of the powerful images we do on Christmas Eve is this when the candles, we pass the kind of the light of the candle and it lights up the whole room, and it's like, if I am a light, how am I going to continue to pass this light onto my neighbor? How am I going to make this light grow even more as a resource or whatever? But I think we have a tendency to pull back and hide it, but this is something we got to share. Like this is something that's it's so beautiful, and it's I don't know. People will often say stuff like it doesn't make sense or whatever, but I disagree. Like, I can't fathom without it. And I want to like I want there to be more people who know. Like, I don't want to keep it to myself. You know what I'm saying? Like, I hope in my life, the idea of being a light, like a candle doesn't have to try to be a candle. It just is a candle. Like, you light it and it just goes until it can't anymore. And that's like how I see myself. Like, when I think of this idea of the light, is like, I want to be a light that is just going, like when people are around, they go, oh, there's a candle lit, like these old days. Or if you watch these movies with these old castles, there's candles everywhere lit to light up the path and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I just want to keep doing that, know?
There, but how does that? Because I think something that's physical, like a candle, and then the light that we show and represent with our walk.
Yeah.
I think those two things can come together in very powerful ways. I tell a quick story. This is probably about all the time we got left, but because it's not real quick. Yeah. But I worked a retreat. This has been a number of years ago. And it was, I guess it was back in the 90s, so it's been 30 years ago now. But, the Soviet Union, had, after the collapse of that and stuff, and churches were able to come in. And so they were, I was working with the Walk to Emmaus, doing a lot of walks at that time. And they were going to take the Walk to Emmaus to Russia. And so they were sending some Russia pastors and maybe a few lay people to America to experience the Walk to Emmaus, this Christian retreat weekend.
Right.
And so, of course, none of us spoke Russian, so they had to send a translator. And I can't remember her name, but it was a wonderful young woman who came to be the translator. And so she's having to translate all weekend long. And so, and her English is impeccable too, by the way. Mm-hmm. And so, but she, for everything, it's not just like translating whatever sermons or talks there were. She'd have to translate everything that happened, like in the dining room or wherever anything was. And so it was an exhausting week, I know.
Yeah.
So at the, towards the ends, somebody asked her, she said, how did you become a Christian? How, and how did you learn to speak English so well? And so she talks about, her journey to do that. And when the first missionaries were going over there after the fall of communism, she got invited to come by this guy named Eddie Fox, who's a very famous Methodist evangelist, to come and stay with him and his wife, because they just kind of fell in love with her because she spoke English so well, to come and experience America, because she never had in the United States. So she came and stayed with him. And so during the time, they weren't like doing heavy-handed evangelism stuff and all this stuff, but they were inviting her to go to church and, all the stuff. And they would have, Bible study groups at their house and that kind of stuff. So she's experiencing it, but, they're not really like, forcing it on her anyway. So then time comes back, and she's about ready to go home, and it's getting close to Thanksgiving. They said, you really haven't experienced the United States until you've had a Thanksgiving in the United States. You should stay just a couple more weeks and do that. So she said, okay. So they changed the plans. She comes back for Thanksgiving. She's there for Thanksgiving. And then she's getting ready to go home again. They said, you know what? You haven't really experienced the United States until you've experienced Christmas here. So you're going to stay for Christmas. So once again, changes her plans. She's going to stay till Christmas. And so it comes Christmas Eve, and it's time to go to the Christmas Eve service. And they go to whatever church it was, and it's packed. And so the time comes for the lighting service, and when that light was being passed, and she's in the back, and she sees that light, she said at that point it came on her, Jesus really is the light of the world. And, coming from the other side to, a former communist area, all that had, transpired for her to be in that place at that time was really how she came to know Christ. So I've always thought it was a very cool story.
That is
It's a good story at Christmas time. I might use it next Christmas.
Bring it back out.
Bring it back out next Christmas. Yeah. But,
it is, and it's so true. And it's a good reminder to walk, to look for Jesus.
Yeah.
Where's he moving? What's he doing? And often there's light, right around it. So
Yeah, for sure.
well, as this is our 50th episode,
Got to eat cake.
Got to eat cake. So we're excited about that. So we're going to go do that here in just a minute. But we just want to say thank you for 50 strong episodes that you guys have been watching. We're just amazed that, I feel like it's 150 just about every week, right at that line between Facebook and YouTube and all that stuff. So thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for those who are help producing it behind the scenes with Tessellation Media, with Nick Boker and Frankie and all them. And it's just been such a big help to us, but also such a cool endeavor that we've all taken on. So thank you all for helping in that. And also just, again, do you want to be in community connection with us? Drop a comment wherever you're watching. Throw us an email. You got something to say? I could see it.
No, because you usually say, Dave, you got anything else? I'm just getting prepared for that.
He's waiting for the cue. So Dave, you got anything else you want to add?
Are you done?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I usually say, no, that's it. But no, this week I will say that of the 3 sermons, what we're looking at this week, I think is a message we all need to hear. I need to hear, and we all need to hear, because we're looking at, I think really, this it's called Grace on the Mountain. And so I think we're going to see one of the great examples of grace in these words that we see here at the end of Matthew 5. And so just teasing that, go ahead and read through Matthew 5, see those last few verses, and we'll be unpacking that on Sunday.
Come join us.
Yeah.
Come 10 o'clock service.
Yeah.
It's been awesome so far. And some good community, and got a couple classes starting up, which has been awesome. And good things are going. So without any further ado, thank you guys for watching, and we'll catch you next time.
God bless.